Hey, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome back to another episode of Max on Color. And to you guys who are joining from the US, and I hope you had a really nice long weekend. Um, and for everybody else joining from around the world, welcome. And I hope you will enjoy the show today. And before we talk about what we are going to talk about today, and by the way, thank you very much, Project Grey Wolf. Hope you have a nice day too. Nice seeing you again today here. So before we're diving into our topics today, let me just do a little housekeeping, right? So if you enjoy the content what Maxon training team has been putting, you can check more events in Maxon website. So you can go to maxon.net/events, and as you can see, there are plenty of webinars coming or shows coming. So today we have Maxon Color, and we'll talk more about grading your phone footage. Why do we do that? I'll talk about that later. And tomorrow there will be also VFX and Chill with Hasyan Sheth. And on a Monday there will be a how do you call it? Demystifying post productions, where Ian and Elly will talk a lot about sculpting and rendering. Right. So that's the agenda at Maxon. And if you are new to the show, you know that you can always get a free T-shirt, right? The link to the free T-shirt, I think Kyle will post that in the chat. And by the way, I'm also accompanied by Kyle, and Kyle in the background. Thank you so much, Kyle, for producing, and you've been great, awesome. And the the link to the shop will be it's in the chat, and the password for today to enter the shop is ZBrush Sculpting. So using that password, you can get one of this merchandise with free of charge. All you need to pay is just the small shipping cost to your address, right? And also, if you're wondering if all the sessions carried out or hosted here at Maxon, if they are recorded, they are recorded, and they are available in YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and search for Maxon Training Team, you'll be able to find the recorded sessions that you want to watch. And what's nice with this recorded session is that if you click one of them, you know that they are timestamped. So you can go directly to the topic that you really want to see right away. All right. So in today's episode, we plan to talk more about grading your iPhone footage or phone footage in this case. Doesn't matter if it's coming from iPhone or Samsung or any brand. Normally, this type of footage shared a common attributes, which we will look into that later, right? Um, the questions is sometimes that you've been asking if you're dealing with phone footage is that is it really worth it to grade those footage at all, right? And in my opinion, I think it's always a nice idea if you have a footage and you add something on top of it. So I think we need to go back to the how do you call it, the original idea or the purpose of color grading itself, right? Why do you need to color grade your footage? Why do you need to color grade your project? Because we want to add value to our projects, right? I mean, in my opinion, I think it's needed. Because if you want to add value, and I think that's the way to see it. And there are really nice example out there. If you ask me, is like I think the phone sensor has like changed a lot in the recent years. They are more capable. And before we're talking about this, I want to point you out to some really good example of cinematic phone footage. So, for example, Apple has their own channel, and they have like this example. It's called Whodunnit, and it is showcasing the iPhone 13 camera. So I will share the link in the chat now. I think you can go and watch that little movie by yourself, and you can like really see how great it was made, right? So let's go back to Resolve. What I want to say to you, what I want to convey to you is that the idea of camera as a recording tool. So doesn't matter be it as a professional camera or a cheap consumer camera or even a smartphone camera, they are still doing one particular job, right? They are recording tool. What you need to understand here, there are before you see your image in your phone, there are several process happening, right? So first, the lights enter your lens, and then this lens is projecting the lights onto your sensor. And depends on what type of sensor you have. You may have like a big full frame sensor, 35 millimeter sensor, or the APS-C crop sensor, or even like the large format 65 millimeter sensor, and depends on the size of the sensor. You probably will understand that the bigger the sensor, the more lights it can get exposed with, right? So when we are dealing with a camera phone sensor, probably they are smaller than our normal 35 millimeter camera sensor. So there's one thing that you need to understand that probably those sensors inside the smartphone, they have a small physical size. So probably there are a lot of math that going behind that sensor to how do you call it, to make the process of capturing the exposing light, how do you call it, better, because due to the fact that the sensor itself is small, there somehow need to be a process that taking care of that, right? So when the sensor got exposed with the light will pass through some filter that is called the Bayer filter. This is like the filter that you normally see that in a lot of like images. If you're just going to Google and search for Bayer filter, you probably see like the RGB filter. So the light passing through that filter, and then it goes to the analog to digital converter, and from there it goes to the computer to do the image processing. So the image processing happening in your camera could be like the debayering process or demosaicing, and then after that some sharpenings and adding up saturations and so on, and you can see your image. But if you manage to bypass the image processing inside the camera, if you can manage to bypass this process, which is like the debayering, demosaicing, and sharpening, and so on, you will get a file. You will get a raw file, and a raw file is not a video; it is a collection of metadata that needs to be debayered, that so that you will be able to see the image, right? So when you are bringing your raw data into Resolve, for example, you are debayering that metadata inside Resolve, right? And I think that's like the more, how do you call it, a valid way if you want to do a post-productions, right? You want to debayer your image in your post-production software. But with the consumer camera, like the smartphone, for example, sometimes this is not possible. Sometimes your image is already debayered inside your camera or inside your phone, and what you see is like the image that fits nicely to the display that you have. So it is fit into the color space that your display can reproduce, and then also it has some sharpening happening onto the image. So those image are processed image. And now the question is, how do you grade those process image? I think the grading principle is not that much different than the other principle. But before we go into that, I think it is nice to knowing the fact that with color grading, you cannot bring back detail that is not captured by the sensor, right? So anytime that you like not optimizing your process to capture your image, and you ended up with a image with less information. So, for example, image that is clipped, too bright or too dark, I think you won't be able to retrieve that kind of information. But um, there are like better way to tackle that. That is to understand the process of image acquisitions, right? I think in the 1930s or something, 1940s, if I'm not mistaken, there's a outdoor landscape photographer named Ansel Adams, and he created a very nice system, and it is very very, how do you call it, amazing how that system that he's developing in 1940s, how, you know, relatable that system still to today's standard. So what he did is that he created 10 different zones, or in this case 11 different zones that goes from 0 to 10. And this is like based on the mid gray of your the mid gray of your color space. So in this case, um, he divided like 5 areas before below mid gray, and divided like 5 other areas above mid grays. So the theory, without me going into like the detail explaining you what a zone system is, I think you can check that. He has a very nice books, like three series of the books that talk about it. The first one is the negative, the second one the camera, and the third one is the print. I think the camera is exactly where he talks about this zone system. The idea is like the oversimplifications versions of this is that if you expose for your middle gray, everything in between will fall into places nicely. So for example, with the system, you know that like brighter skin tone, for example, it sits somewhere between the middle gray itself and one stop above that. And with a darker skin tone, you normally have like it normally sits in this area. So for example, let me just reduce the size, 25, softening. There you go. Something like that. So normally bright skin tone sits around there, and a darker skin tone sits around there. And with the pure blacks and pure whites, you're not supposed to have like the detail, because like it's pure blacks, there's no details. With this one step above black, there's like slight details and more details on the third zone and so forth. So the idea is, if you are exposing for this your middle gray, everything else will fall in between like nicely. And by doing that, I think you can get like as much as informations in your scene as possible and fit them nicely into the dynamic range of your camera that your camera can record, right? So okay, now let's move into the next topic. This is like the preparations before we are going into like the grading itself. Of course, we'll do some grading about that, but it's like just to bring us into the same pace, right? When we are grading, I would argue that I think it is nice if you can afford to go into any logarithmic space. So we know that the clip that you got from your phone, they looks nice on your display right away, but that's a great indications that that type of clip are not in the display, are not in the logarithmic space. They are fitted to the color space which your display can normally reproduce. And generally speaking, the color space that display can reproduce accurately are normally very small compared to the color space that you can work in, like the logarithmic color space. So the idea is that the idea that I want to bring to you is that I think there are several tools that will behave totally like different when you are using it in the display space or if you're using it in the um, logarithmic space. So I would argue that you always need to go to the logarithmic space to be able to tackle your grading correctly. So in this example, we have a ramp that goes from black to white, and we are in a display space. In this case, it is a Rec 709 because I set my timeline to be in Rec 709. So if I go to color management, so my timeline color space is Rec 709 gamma 2.4, and then my output color space is the same, Rec 709 gamma 2.4. So any node that I'm creating here, if I'm not moving into one timeline, moving from one color space to the other, I will stay in Rec 709 gamma 2.4, right? So, for example, like the very general things that you want to take care of is, like, for example, the exposure adjustments, right? Exposure adjustment will behave differently in a display color space because it has a gamma tone curve, and compared to a logarithmic color space. So, for example, in the display space, if I just add my exposure using offset, you'll see that everything move like simultaneously. All my blacks, my whites, my midpoint, everything moves simultaneously. So let me bring up the scope. So for example, here we have a ramp that goes from black to white. And in this case, it goes from 0 to 100, right? And if I move my offset control, which is similar to exposure, you can see that it is affecting the image like in its entirety, like simultaneously. So for example, if I am moving into my display space image, in this case, it is a Rec 709 gamma 2.4 image. And if we do exposure adjustment, and if I bring up my scope, you can see that everything moves just like that, right? So there is no roll off, no soft clipping in the shadow. Everything just moved up and down just like that, right? So when we are moving from display space color space, and we move into a logarithmic space, for example, things will behave slightly different. So for example, here, I have a color space transform that goes from Rec 709 into any random color space. In this case, I just pick RE white gamut with RE log C3. And here, we're going back from RE log C3 into Rec 709. So anything that happens in between these nodes will be carried in RE log C3, will be carried in RE white gamut with RE log C3 tone curve, right? So for example, the same adjustment, let me bring my waveform up. So the same offset adjustment will feel like that. You can really see that there is like a pivot that happens in the blacks, right? And this is like the example that you can follow along. Like if you have your computer open, just try to do the same settings. Try to do like the offset adjustment in the display space, and then do the round trip with the nodes with the color space transform into one logarithmic space, and then do your exposure adjustment there. You'll feel it. You'll feel the difference. So the same adjustment applied to an image will result in this type of behavior. As you can see, it is not moving uniformly up and down. And as you can see, as I increase the exposure, the topmost part move first, and then after that, it drags my midtone and then my blacks. And if I reduce my exposure, my blacks stays, and then it brings like the topmost and my midtone area with it. So it feels totally different. And that's just the exposure adjustment. Another thing that will differ like massively is the temperature and tint adjustment, right? So for example, if you're just moving your temperature, this is in display space, you can really see that it is pivoting in blacks, and it just moving your gain like towards that directions. So, and if we are doing that in the logarithmic color space, you see, and there is like this soft roll off in the curves, and that affects your grading process. And what's actually happening is that when we are going into a color space, into a logarithmic color space, it is applying a logarithmic curve, and it affects our adjustment. So that logarithmic curve affect your exposure control, for example, or any other control, temp and tint, and so on. So now I hope that's a how do you call it? Something worth noting, that anytime you have like a clip that is already looking good in your display or in your phone, you probably want to transfer them into a logarithmic space to start working there, right? One logarithmic space that is really really nice that you can use for working is the ACES CCT for grading, right? You can also grade in ARRI Alexa Log C3, for example, but it really comes to your preference. What's nice is that with ACES, if you have like plenty different cameras, and you will like map them into a very uniform space, and everything will behave like similarly in that space. So you can kind of like, if you're already familiar with one behavior of your tool, for example, you'll not lose the feeling that you don't have like this strange feeling like why my tool behave strangely, right? So let's go to the project itself. So last couple of months, my friend Jonas came to me and asked me, he's like, hey Max, I have like this iPhone footage that I want to grade. Could you please grade them? And it is a really nice, well shot footage that was used for one of his presentations at FMX. So if you want to, watch the footage first. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so let's watch the footage together. And by the way, if you want to know how he created that scene, it is also available in YouTube. So I think it is here. So I'll share the link with you in the chat if you want to know more about how Jonas created that scene inside Cinema 4D. Right? Let's go back to Resolve. So this is like the footage that I graded with looks on top of it, but originally it came to me like this, right? So let me update all thumbnails, right? So he has an iPhone footage, and he add like a 3D element on top of it. So by itself, it already looks nice. So what I can do here is just tweak the footage a little bit and lightly color grade it so that it will looks nice. Add the production value, right? What I normally do whenever I do color grade, and it's also like really doesn't matter what type of footage that you're dealing with, is that I normally work with node structure. But in this case, I only have two different footage. So, in my opinion, I don't think creating a node structure for this will be significant. It will have a significant impact to the speed to the way you're working. I mean, with a node structure, for example, if you're creating a similar like node, like for example, let us create something like that. If you have like a structure, you will build a muscle memory. You know for sure what going on in node number one, what going on number two, and if you apply it to all your clips, you can do something in one node, and then go to the color, and you can color menu and ripple it. So ripple to the current groups, and by doing that, your adjustment will be applied to the same node, to the other to the other clips that belong to the same group, right? So that like really increase the efficiency when you are grading a lot of clips. But in this case, we only have two nodes, two clips. So I don't think creating a node structure will be important for this one. But what I know for sure is that I like to do my exposure adjustment after my contrast and so on and so forth. And let me show you something. Like, for example, when I am doing my exposure adjustment and adding my contrast, after that, it will have like a different result. So for example, let's create another still album, grab still. So this is exposure and contrast in the same node. But if I separate them, stupid me. So if I separate them, sorry guys, it was 29.2. And something, sorry, I do it exactly in the same node. Noob. Okay, now if we compare, you see that the exposure adjustment with the contrast in the same node, it has like a brighter result. So that's like really depend. If you like it, you can stay with it. But for me, I like to do my contrast before my exposure, right? So that's just one concern. Let me just reset all node grade. And also, what I normally do is that I'll create 4 0 nodes for the adjustment. And I know that I want to do the exposure right at the end. So in this case, it feels that the exposure is quite okay. Perhaps what we can do is that tweak the contrast a little bit. Okay, right. Now, what I want to what I want to say to you is that I am at the moment breaking my own rule. I don't know yet which type of like color space I am in at the moment. So let us check our project settings. And if you go to the color management, apparently I already set it to ACEScct. So that's nice. So in this case, I have the project set up in ACEScct. Why did I close this? I have my project set up to ACEScct with the ACES versions 1.3. And then the input transform is Rec 709 because that's the color space of my clip that I received from Jonas. And I want to target Rec 709 display space as my output transform, right? So I'm enabling the reference gamut compress and also color space aware grading tools. Let me cancel this. So color space aware grading tools, that's like a really nice things to know, right, guys? So for example, One of the color space aware tools is this HDR color wheel, which is like very nice to use. And the exposure control here is like more accurate, photometrically accurate than using the offset control with the lift gamma gain control with the primary wheels, right? So but the thing is, this tools always refer to your project settings. So if you are clicking these three dots here, you'll see that here there's a color space and gamma options. And by default, it is pointing to your timeline, and the gamma is also pointing to your timeline. So it means that it is always pointing into this settings inside the color management settings, right? So in this case, I am in ACEScct, and everything that I will do with a HDR dynamic range will be performed in ACEScct, and gamma will be performed in ACES AP1, and the gamma would be ACEScct, right? So you can set it manually. You can set it manually, and gamma to ACEScct. But since we already do the setup in the color management tab, you can also just leave it as default because it is always pointing into that settings, right? So first thing first, we want to adjust contrast. And another setting that I need to show you is that in the general options, I turn off the use S curve for contrast. And that is because, let's go back to this project and see this one. All right. So if I have S-curve as contrast enable, and if I'm using any contrast tool, like for example here, it will, as I increase my contrast, it will introduce the shoulder and toe into my contrast, right? So it has a soft roll off and in the highlight, and also it have like this soft clip in the shadow. But if I disable that, and as I increase contrast, it will increase my shadow or reduce my shadow. It will increase the contrast linearly. So in this case, it becomes the lift and gain tool at the same time, and you can target your middle point where that adjustment starts to take an effect. So for example, if you know your mid-gray point, you can target that as a pivot point, and by tackling the contrast, increasing or reducing the contrast, you're simultaneously adjusting the lift and gain at the same time, right? So that's why I disable the use S-curve as a contrast options. So in this case, we know that the mid-gray point of ACEScct is 0.413. So I'll just typing in the 0.413, and then in the contrast, I can slightly reduce or increase that. So by doing that, it will just affecting my lift and gain control without changing my midpoint, which is nice, right? But first thing first, before I'm going on and grade this clip, I think it is nicer if we start by creating the look for this project, right? So in this case, let me just disable this a little bit and move to this one because I have the hologram here, because that could be like the things that break up the most, the hologram. So that's the thing that I want to pay attention to. In this case, I can just use Magic Bullet Looks, drop it in the timeline. So by using the looks in the Magic Bullet Looks in the timeline, I will affect all the clips that are in my timeline. So in this case, just use once and it applies to everything. So let's launch my Magic Bullet Looks. And in the color management, let's switch from 1D color handling to ACES, because we set our project management to color management to ACES. And we are in ACEScct, so the input will be in ACEScct, and the output should be the same as the input, right? Or I can just click same as input. And I want to preview it in Rec 709 because that's the monitor you are currently viewing this image on. So the look that I created for Jonas back then was this one. Where is it? I saved it as a preset. There you go. This one. Hologram, Jonas Hologram Sci-Fi or something. Let me go to my hologram. There you go. And edit look again. There you go. So the idea behind the look creations is that, first thing, I have the film negative, and in this case, the film negative set into 5:19 Fusion 3 500T. So with the film negative, it gives me like this effect. So you know what? Let's create it from scratch. I have a change of mind, guys. Why not? Let's do from scratch. Drop in film negative, and then I don't want the grain, and probably I can change it to 50 to 19 and reduce the color temperature slightly because I want it to be cooler, right? And after that, I want to increase the contrast of this piece of the look. I can do that with a contrast here, or I can use the vintage modern slider to increase the contrast and also tint the shadow cooler and then warming up the highlight. We want that, but probably not that much, maybe around 20. And perhaps cool it a little bit more, around 25. It looks nice. But now, instead of using the contrast tool here, what I want to emulate is the process of bleach bypass, which is also increasing contrast to our image. And in this case, I can just use the print bleach bypass tool and reduce the exposure compensation to 0.5 and reduce the strength to probably just 35. Something like that. Okay, that's 0.3 max. Come on. Okay, something like that may work. And now what I want to do is that perhaps I want to create, let's see if two-strip process works. No, I don't like it. I want to create like a soft halations and soft, how do you call it, diffusions. And we can do that with optical diffusion tool. And what's nice with optical diffusion tool is that you have all this parameter, but what's nice is that it has a lot of presets made based on the specifications of like available diffusion filter in the market. So my favorite one is this Glimmer glass, right? And if I want to, I can play around with the strength, maybe just reduce it slightly. So this is before, and that is after, something like this. And the quality, fast, it says, it do what it says. It will be fast, but the quality will be lower. So productions is a nice middle ground, but if you can afford it, just go to best because it always looks nicer. But the how do you call it? The downside of this is that it will be heavier. So in this case, I'll just use this. And also perhaps adds a little bit halations. And instead of making it red, we can just make it blue, something like that. Or let's check the available presets. It doesn't have any particular effects on this, guys. So let's just drop it. And What we want to do next is probably add a little bit of grain before our film negative or after our film negative in this case. And we can add renoiser. And I don't want to make it very noisy. I just want to increase like a very slight noise into the image. There are two presets that do just that, image vitamins, or also this light noise, which is nice. And what's nice with renoiser is that you can change the amount of grain in the red channel, or you can change it in the green channel or blue channel. And you can also change the size of the grain in that particular channel. And also you have the control to mess around with the number of grains if you want more grain in the highlight or more grain in the midtone or shadow. The controls are there. So for example here, let me just increase slightly the grain slightly in the shadow. And I think that's it. So that's our looks. I can just confirm it. This is before and that is after. I quite like it, right? So one thing that we need to check is that how our looks tackle our blacks. And in this case, it is bringing our blacks down a little bit. And that's totally fine. Okay. Otherwise, I would create another node after the look to tackle the blacks level. If I want to make it like darker, for example, just go to the log wheel and make the black area richer or darker in this case. So before, after, before, I think you can see in this area over here. Control F, and with the blacks, without black adjustment, no black adjustment. So I think let's stay with the black adjustment so that we will bring the blacks down a little. So before, after, right. So it increased the contrast of your image as well, right? Okay. Now let's go back to the clip level. So I did the looks in the timeline level so that it affects everything. Now I'll do the clip, the corrections in the clip level. So in this case, I'll just mess around with the contrast, the amount of contrast that I have in the scene. It looks okay-ish. And what I want to do next is probably the exposure adjustment, but I don't think we need an exposure adjustment. What nice is that if we can redirect our audience eyes to the image. So for example, at the moment, the most important things in this image probably is this coin, which gets scanned with this laser beam. Probably I want to draw the attention of our viewer's eye into this coins. And to do that, I can just perhaps create several layer, how do you call it? Parallel node. Sorry, I lost the word there, guys. So in this case, by pressing the Control Alt P, you can create a parallel node, and by pressing Alt O, you create an outside node. I'll talk more about the outside node just after this. And this is like a really interesting stuff if you can create like this outside node, because anytime you have windows, so for example, let me create power window like this. If I'm creating like this circular power window, it will target this area. But by creating the outside node, it will create the area outside of that particular window, like automatically. So that's really nice one. So I want to target the coin, perhaps make it slightly bigger, and preview it. Increase the softness slightly, reduce the size. All right. So now I want to bring our audience eyes into the coins. And to do that, I can just go to the outside node and reduce the gain. And by doing that, you have like this effects of darkening the surrounding and leaving your subject as the brightest part of the image, right? And what you can also do is that in this coin, I will just increase slightly the midtone detail. That's another tips. Our eyes always reads the most contrasty area in the image first, and also the brightest area in the image. So making your subject slightly sharper, and then also slightly brighter, probably that's a good idea to make to draw the attentions of your audience, right? And I think that's okay. I can also add gradient window, and just to shape the light a little bit, Shift H. So something like this. In this case, just reduce the gain. So instead of increasing the light, what we want is to reduce the light slightly, right? So this is before, after a very, very teeny tiny adjustment, right? So now we can move to the next one. I think that's okay. The second one will be this one. And if you compare, if you move from this scene to this one, feel like the second one is a little bit brighter, okay, right? And we can tackle that with the contrast adjustment. So let's go to the HDR wheel and set our pivot and reduce the contrast slightly. What you can also do is that you can right-click the first clip and go to White Timeline Clip. Okay. So in this case, you can see the difference in your monitor, in your scopes. You can really see that, the first clip, I think we are in a quite similar territory there, contrast-wise. So before, after, maybe just 0.9. Create another node after that, and here, let's just bring this up slightly, something like that. So this is before, after. I don't think the exposure adjustment makes sense to this. It even make it brighter, but let's just keep it this way because we will do a lot of power windows after this, right? And in this case, what I want to do is that I want to draw our attentions into this hologram over there, right? So what we can do is that, again, we can create another serial node and press Alt-P to create another parallel nodes. And in those parallel nodes, you can press Alt-O to create the outside nodes. So something like that. And here, let's, we are now working in this dodge and burning concept. We want to change the ratio of the contrast of our image by putting the brightness more into the area that we want our audience to pay attention to, and probably less towards the area that they don't need to know. Like in this case, probably the background is not so important compared to the subject. So what we can do is that we can just draw a power window for this one. Again, make it very soft. And here I have the outside area, and I can go to my gain control and reduce it slightly. So before, after, I think that's already quite nice. And what I can do on top of that is that perhaps I can make the hologram slightly brighter than it is currently is, right? But now there's like some frames where the hologram is out of the frame, right? So starting from here, okay. So what we can do is that probably we need to animate this node. But first, let's just do the adjustment. We can increase the midtone detail on this one. So with the midtone detail, without, let me bring it like full screen. So this is with and without. I think we like it with midtone details, right? So on the other node, on the outside node, I can just slightly reduce the gain. So now we need to track this node number 4. And to do so, we can just go to our keyframes and we can select our node number 4. We arm it. And let's see where the hologram is out of the frame. Something like that. And we can go here. This is where the effect should be at 0. And just by typing in the key output to 0, it is automatically putting keyframes into this particular time, right? So probably at this time, I want the effect to take place. And again, I can just simply set the gain into 1. And as you can see, by default, it is interpolating all the area in between, right? So instead of switching your effect on and off like that, it gradually bring it to 1. Okay, so that literally is. I think that's another way. That's one way that you can grade your footage, your phone footage, by moderating the amount of the adjustment that you are doing. And also, the very important thing that you probably need to know is that work in the logarithmic space. So if you have like a footage that was shot in Rec 709, for example, bring them to any logarithmic space that you're familiar with and start working in there. And the second example that I have is that some moment ago, I think last week, my friend Elly in the training team has a project, has a promo video that was done in iPhone that needs to be broadcasted live. So she kind of like asked me how to, she kind of asked me to grade the footage. What I actually did is actually not really much. Let me switch my camera. So I go from the original to the left, on the left side, to the graded versions on the right hand side. So let's go back. And let me give you a sneak peek to what I did to Elly promo's video. I hope I didn't butcher the video too much, Elly. And if you're watching, I'm sorry for butchering your video. Okay. Now, the difference with Jonas' project and Elly's project is Elly's project has a lot more shots. And if you see, there are like probably like around 22 shots. And this is where I want to work with my note structure, right? So for example, here I created like this note structure. And the very first one I dedicated to noise reductions. The second one is balancing. The third one is just the contrast, exposure, and some saturations. So let us just reset this grade. and balance and color correct this two clips over here, right? I also group them. So if I go to group, talking head, these two grades belong to this like similar angle of the shots, all right? And if you can see let me just disable this. There is look that goes on top of it, right? So there's just a temperature control with the HDR, and saturations increase in the LAB space. Well, I can break it down to you. So show compound node. So what I did is that I create like 3 parallel nodes. And on the first one, I changed the color space to let LAB color space. And the second one is also LAB color space, and the same for the third one. And here, for the first one, only channel 1 is active on the second parallel node. Only second channel is active, and the third one, you guess what? Only third channel is active. And here I play around with the curve. So by increasing the curve in the A channel, I got pretty much like, oh, it's very very subtle. I think you can see that. So the idea is that if you are increasing any value in the A channel of the LAB color space, the positive value will result in a slightly magenta, in the magenta tint, and the negative value will result in a slightly greenish tint. So let me just reset this for example. Like for example, if I am increasing, hang on, something is not right. Let me go out from this. I don't know what's happening there, but let me give you an example on this ramp image. So here, if I'm going to LAB color space, and here is just channel 1 active. This is also the same LAB color space for the second one, but only second channel is active. The third one is also the same thing, but only the third channel is active. So here, if I am playing around with my curve in the L channel, that means I'm just playing around with the luminosity of the image, with the lightness of the image. I'm not changing any color informations, but I'm just playing with the brightness value. So that's very nice to increase contrast. But as I increasing the positive value, for example, I can also use the highlights and shadow. So for example, in the A channel, of LAB color space, if I increase my highlight, I will get magenta. But then if I reduce my highlight, I will get cyan, greenish tint. So what's nice is that you can do like minus value in the shadow and increase the positive value in the highlight. So you can get like this tint. What you can also do is that in the B channel, you can increase as you increase the, sorry, not saturations. As you increase to as you give like the positive value, you will get a yellow tint as a result. But then if you move to the negative value, you will get blue. So this is very nice if you want to do like a split toning. So for example, let's just increase the highlights and reduce the shadow in this area. So I'm cooling down the shadow. Yeah, I reset the node. Sorry, guys. LAB channels 1 deactivated, channel 2 deactivated. So in this case, just the B channel and combined with the A channel, I got like this nice split toning. So that's what I did to Elly footage for the looks. The split toning with the LAB color space, and I mess around with the RGB color mixer, and then Magic Bullet looks just to introduce some optical diffusions and print bypass, and also renoiser, right? So that's the overall look. And the way I grade this, the way I color correct this, is that simply working with this node tree. So let's create 4 nodes somewhere over here. It doesn't have to be like the same one that I was using. And that's literally the area that I want to use my power window. And that's the outside node. Control O, Alt O, sorry guys. Alt or Option O to create an outside node. And then I'll create another serial node after that. So the first one, I can play around with the contrast on this one. And if I go to my color managements, it is also in ACES. So I know for sure that I want to set the pivot point to 413. In this case, I can reduce the contrast slightly. And I can go to the exposure control and just reduce it very slightly. And perhaps I can also do a little balancing using my offset control. So perhaps reduce some red a little bit and reduce the blue a little bit to increase yellow, but just slightly. Something like that. And reduce green, just 1 point. There you go. I think that's nice. And I will dedicate this node for noise reductions. But while I'm here, what I can also do is that I can play around with the lighting and slightly relight my scenes. I want the attentions to go towards Elly, and I can use my power window, make it softer, something like that. And then on the outside node, I can just reduce the gain to create like this effects, vignette effects, right? So this is before and this is after. As you notice, I'm not increasing any lights on the clip, but instead I'm working to reduce the amount of light in the clip, right? So by doing that, I'm bringing the attentions to Elly. And what I can also do is that since it seems like we have a light coming from this area, can also use a gradient. And here, I can just reduce the gain even more to increase like this perceptions of contrast to our image, right? And for the third one, I think I can just mess around with the face a little bit. Something like this. And this is another tip that you can do. You can reduce the softness, go to the tracking, and you can track the footage slightly better when you don't have like the softness, okay? And I can go back and increase the softness. And now what I can do is that I want to reduce my mid-tone detail just to make the skin slightly more even. So I'm not saying that your skin is not even, Elly. I'm sorry. I'm just, making it nicer, right? So that's the trick. And then after that, once I'm finished with that, I still have like these 3 other nodes that I can, use as a spare anytime I want to to do any more adjustment. So I can go to the next clip and right click on my mouse to clip to, how do you call it, to copy all the adjustment that I do with one clip. But what I would recommend you is that you do this. So you go to one of the clip, do any adjustment. In this case, perhaps we want to bring the tint, the temperature slightly down. You can do that, and then go to your color and ripple to the current groups. And by doing that, it will ripple all your changes to the clip in the same group. So that's another way that you can do to work faster, right? So is there any questions in the chat so far? Seems like all is good. And for Samaxter, yeah, please, if you have important informations like what you said in the chat, please email me. We'll take it from there. Let me show the email that you can use for that. You can email me at maxoncolor@maxon.net, and we'll take it from there. Okay. So otherwise, if there is no questions in the chat, seems like I run over the time. Let me just bring back into this page over here. So if you go to maxon.net and you go to news and events, you'll see that there are plenty of webinars coming next week and the week after. So tomorrow, Hashi and Seth will be back with VFX and Chill. And then on Monday, there will be Demystifying Post-Productions, where Ian and Elly will talk about sculpting with ZBrush. And if you are new to the show and you want to get a free t-shirt, you should do so. You can go to the link that we post in the chat today. I think if you scroll up, you'll find the link to the shop. And to enter the shop, you need a passcode. And the passcode for today is ZBrush Sculpting, right? And if you want to watch the recording of this show or any other show, you can go to YouTube and type in Maxon Training Team. And there you can find the video that you want to watch. And those video will be timestamped. That means you can skip to the right directly to the point, to the topic that you want to watch, right? So that's one. And here, there's a really nice short film shot in iPhone 13. It's called Whodunnit in Apple channel. So go and watch that. And if you want to watch how Jonas created his hologram scene, it is also available in Maxon YouTube channel. I think you can find the link in the chat. If you scroll up a little bit, you will find it. Okay. And yeah, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, Kyle, for producing in the back. So I'm accompanied by Kyle today. Kyle is helping me producing the show, and he's doing a great job. Thank you so much, Kyle. You rocks. And yeah, until next time, I'll see you in next 2 weeks' time then. And I wish you a nice day. And until we meet again, take care. Bye-bye.